back to the channel. I thought I'd do a discussion about the Celine Sciamma film Petite Maman. This is going to be sort of spoilerific, so if you haven't seen the film at all, I encourage you to go watch it. It's available on Mubi at the moment. Petite Maman is the follow-up to what was an incredibly successful film, Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And I think a lot of people expected Celine Sciamma to take her filmmaking to another elevated level after that. There was a lot of Oscar buzz around that film. There was a lot of love generally from the film community and from people that were involved in making films around it. And for a lot of people, Petite Maman seems to have fallen a little flat. I'm going to discuss maybe why that is, but with an awful lot of this, I think a lot of it comes down to expectation and what people expected to go in and see it. Because the hallmarks of what people liked about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, a lot of that kind of stuff does not appear here. For a start, Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a period piece. It has a kind of overarching bigger message, I think, that is very in vogue with topics that are available around at the time. So, you know, the Me Too movement and the kind of the strength of female characters all played a large part in Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and certainly those are the things that I really love about Portrait of a Lady on Fire. But it is also sumptuously shot. It's absolutely beautiful to look at. But it uses multiple places, big rooms, big sets, outside spaces that are spectacular to be photographed at, and yet Petite Maman seems to shrink away from that. Now, where it's still very much like Portrait of a Lady on Fire is at the heart, I think, of what Celine Sciamma is about, and that is about character stories and about relationships. And Petite Maman, I just felt like a big warm hug watching Petite Maman, because some of the themes that are in it, about it are things that I think a lot of us can gravitate towards, especially as we get older and especially as we go through the stages of life and the circle of life. In order to talk about this, I'll talk a little bit about the plot, but if you've seen the film, obviously you know about the plot. But I'm going to try and pick out key parts that I think speak an awful lot to these themes. So Petite Maman is really the story of a young girl who is going with her parents to clean out her grandmother's house. Now, the grandmother is the mother of her mother, and they all go along, and it's quite obvious that the young girl is regaled with stories of her mother growing up in the same place. So she's been told to look out for certain things when they get there, because they were certain things that she connected to when she was that age. That is, the mother connected to it around that age. And very clearly one of the earlier things we're looking for is like a little copse or a little grouping of 4 trees surrounded by each other, which she made a hut or a little hideaway from that she should spend her time in. And the younger girl can't wait to see this kind of stuff. Not so much interested in the grandmother or otherwise and exploring that part, because she's too young to really have made that connection. They just talk briefly about her last words with her granny and whether she would like them to be changed, that kind of thing. And you have these different levels of grief then that fall into that. You have the person that is too young to really appreciate grief and have seen that stage of life develop, the very naive part. You have the mother that is trying to deal with her own grief and whether she can and cannot, and actually within the stage of the film she disappears from it and removes herself because she can't cope with the grief. And then you have the husband or the father of the young child who's there to facilitate the grief. He's the person that's going to do the work, what they set there to do, which is clear out the house, etc. And so we have a very limited scope and set. We have this house, we have a bit of the surrounding area, and that's it. We don't really venture beyond that. This is a film very much from the viewpoint of this young girl, and it's when she gets bored and when she goes out to explore the world around her that we see this outcropping of trees. We see a hut, and then we see somebody that looks just like our young protagonist. And actually, for me anyway, I was so caught up with what I was feeling visually in seeing the trees, etc., that I missed. This young friend was identical to our young protagonist. And that happened a bit later because my mind is swimming actually with the possibilities of what this meant. We were living in a sort of fantasy playground at this stage, and from this point on the film certainly goes in a fantastical way, but I think this really talks about what I think is the key theme of this entire film, and that is children wanting to connect with their parents. And I think specifically Petite Maman, what it does beautifully and why it feels like a warm hug is that the child wants to connect with a parent on their level and on their terms. Not trying to fit in when their mum's not too busy, or bedtime when the mum wants them to go to sleep and they want to stay awake and talk to the parents. I think those are things, if anybody's a parent, you'll appreciate and understand. But as these two young girls come together, you see a very close friendship forms. And I think if you think about that, it fills you full of hope. Is that the people that we were younger are still the people that we are today in some ways, even though life has a way of changing us. There's an impending doom in the future of an operation that's going to happen. There's an impending doom when she gets brought into the house and she sees her grandmother as a much younger person. She sees the warmness actually and the warmth of that house and that household and how she's invited in as a new friend, and everybody seems oblivious to the fact that these two girls are identical, but I think there plays into the fantasy of the film itself. And while we have limited sets and while we have a limited scope, both houses at the edge, so one being the fantasy house and one being the real house, look identical, with a few changes made to the wallpaper, etc. that are in there. But they connect over lots of things. They connect over who they are as people. They connect over food. They connect over lots of different aspects of life. And their loving of life. There's a lot of giggling and laughter. And also on the side of that, sort of peering in the background, is how this young girl is dealing with her own grief of her grandmother and how that resolves itself without really being a prominent plot point or anything. It's something that's kind of left unsaid, like an awful lot of grief and the changing in life cycle. So Petite Maman, for me, is a sumptuous film. It's a lovely film. It's a gorgeous shot, even with limited sets, and one that speaks to relationships, and relationships that we have with the ones that we love. Even when they're not around at the time, we tend to think of them. Even when they are around the time, we don't appreciate what we have right in front of us. And Petite Maman, while being a very short film of 70-something minutes, is not a film that goes into multiple layers of depth, etc. Because what it presents strongly. It presents very forcefully at you, and you're left with the feeling of, I adored that. I appreciate what the film is trying to say. And while that may leave some people cold, maybe it's because I'm that middle-aged white guy coming to an age where the people that I love are getting older, and we're seeing a lot of change of life, and especially coming from a COVID point of view, it's hard to escape the fact that a lot of the people that we loved and a lot of people have passed on, and this grief process, without being heavy-handed or being hit you over the head with it, is something that a lot of people have went through, and people got to leave a lot of things unsaid. And for that reason, I think Petite Maman, maybe Whisper, is a film that I appreciate even more than the more storied films of Celine Sciamma's past, because it feels entirely personal. And not just entirely personal to the filmmaker, but you, the viewer, because you can substitute in the characters, you can substitute in the people there for people in your own life. If you've enjoyed this little talk through Petite Maman, I'd love to hear your thoughts of Petite Maman itself. And if you want to hear more content or breakdowns of films like that from my point of view, please let me know, please like, please subscribe, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care, all the best.